Hey guys, Bart coming to you from TST Industries in Florida, bringing you another episode of TST Garage. In the studio with me today is a beautiful 2016 and up Kawasaki ZX10R. This bike has been around for a couple years now. It is 2018. This was launched in 2016. When Kawasaki first came out with this bike, we laid our eyes on it and we thought, wow, what an awesome design. The only place that we felt that it needed help was the taillight. There's a kind of a plain end cap to a really techy, awesome, angular, sexy tail. And we felt that we should probably design something that better complements that geometry. So here they are. We have two different versions. One has a clear lens, one has a smoked lens. It's entirely up to you which one you choose. Both look really, really great, and they're really bright units. They feature an integrated circuit on board, so they do have a signaling circuit to replace your OEM signals if you choose to do so. If you don't, this is still a really cool replacement for the OEM taillight. Our taillight is pre-fitted with all OEM connectors, so it plugs right in. The physical installation mimics exactly the OEM component, so no fuss there. And our taillight is really, really, really bright. We've packed it with LEDs. We designed our optical system to take the LED point lights and focus them on these surfaces here, and also provide a nice light pipe type emission from around the pockets. It's a really nice, elegant solution to the tail end of this bike, and I think you guys will really like it. Each one of these lights ships with load balancing resistors. Anytime you change your OEM incandescent light bulbs in the signaling system to an LED type signal, the system will draw much less current and the bike will try to alert you that something's going on. So you will need to wire these in, or you can also procure one of these TST Industries relays. And we do have a separate video showing you how to install this, but this is a plug and play component. You just plug it in place of the OEM unit and it'll fix your flash rate to 85 cycles per minute. It comes pre-configured to that rate. If you choose to do so, you could slip off the gray cover, fine adjust to whatever flash rate you like. Anyway, we have chosen to install the clear one on this bike. I think it'll go really nicely with the elements on this bike, so that's what we're gonna do. The choice is really up to you. They're both very bright units, so you can rest assured that you'll get enough light emission. That's it for now. Let's get on the bike and start wrenching. On this particular bike, we already have installed one of our Elite 1 Fender Eliminators, so we will pick up the installation from the point where you already have some sort of a Fender Eliminator on the bike. Hopefully it's one of ours. If not, the mounting and disassembly will likely be very similar to ours, so no fuss there. If you need help with the steps required for removing the fender and putting on a Fender Eliminator, we do have a separate video on our channel, on our YouTube channel, and on our website. So that can possibly give you the pointers necessary to get to this point. We'll take the passenger seat or seat cowl off and proceed from there. Now, before we proceed with the disassembly of the tail, I want to take your attention and point it towards the bottom of this tail light and its meeting edge with the lower subtray here. There is a slight gap even in the OEM setup here. It measures roughly 2.5 millimeters, and you will see that after our tail light's installed as well. There are a couple ways to close this gap, but this installation will basically focus on just doing apples to apples installation. Another thing I want to mention is this tab here. Before you disassemble this tail, please note that this tab from the outer tail sits on top of the subtray plastic. That's how it'll need to be returned into place. I'm going to use a 4mm Allen key and remove these 4 fasteners. Now the top portion of the tail is free to come out. We just slide it back to release the locking mechanism. Have a series of locking tabs that go into interference geometry here. It slides back and off. Put that to the side, and let's now slip off some electrical relay components here from these tabs. There's one here and 2 up front. And now I will use an 8mm socket to remove these 4 screws to remove this tray. one additional plug here. We'll need to disconnect it. Okay guys, here you see me disconnecting the tip over sensor plug. I did this basically for cleanliness of my approach to this installation. I don't like to have these parts laying around while I'm turning screws and moving components around. If you are okay keeping it on the front seat, then go ahead and just leave it in place. Do not disconnect it. If you do disconnect it, do not power up the bike because it will throw error code 31 and turn on your check engine light. No big concern there. It will clear if it's reconnected and the bike is run for about 50 miles or so. So not a big deal, but just for the sake of not having that annoying light go off and make you wonder what's going on with the bike, either leave it in place or do not power up the bike with the sensor disconnected. And that comes off. Now we have nice access to all of this here. Our electrical connectors are within this boot. So you have your main taillight wire with its plug that goes into this 3-position plug that will need to be disconnected. If you have signals and a license plate light on the bike, the connectors are also in here. The gray and black box type connectors are for the signals. And then there's a Sumitomo type connector in here, 2-position plug that is for your license plate light. All right, now that we have the taillight disconnected, we can go ahead and grab a Phillips screwdriver and remove these 2 screws. These screws hold our subtray plastic to the subframe. Once we release them, we get some flexibility here. And then we have 2 additional Phillips head screws that connect the actual taillight component to the subtray. So we'll need to turn those out. So at this point, we have pretty good flexibility here. The only thing that is still binding us up and preventing us from flexing this entire assembly down is our fender eliminator, or if you have stock fender still on the bike, that will need to be dropped down. So we'll remove our fender eliminator. We don't have any wiring going through it at the moment, so that will not be a concern. But if you still have stock signals or some aftermarket signals connected to your setup here, you will likely need to unroute all the wires from within, and they usually exit right about here and connect to this setup. So once you get to this point and you have your either fender eliminator or fender assembly off, now you'll be able to flex this down and unroute your wires and proceed from there. So like I mentioned before, all these fasteners out allow us to get enough flex to now get this taillight out. First thing that will need to happen is we'll need to push the forward section of the taillight up to clear the bosses that it sits on. It has rubber grommets on the taillight that sit on these bosses. It's sort of a cumbersome fit with all this wiring running through here, so we just need to be very patient and slip that off. And once those bosses clear and we can get forward to back motion, we just push the taillight back and it'll slip off this tab. And now it's free within this assembly. So what I like to do is flex it away enough so that I could turn my taillight in a way that I'll clear one of the corners without stressing any of the other elements or scratching them. And at that point, we'll have enough clearance here to slip it out. So these are the grommets that fit over these bosses that I was mentioning. Let me get some stuff out of the way so you guys can see. These grommets sit on these bosses here. So first we slip that off, and then that permits us to slip taillight off this keeper here. Now this is fairly loose on most bikes, so I take it off and I replace it just before we put our new taillight in. We'll need to scavenge these rubber grommets. We will be reusing them on our new taillight. Once that's done, we could rebuild with the TST Industries taillight. So in order to perform a successful installation on the ZX10R, we will need to remove this component from the taillight. We use a Phillips screwdriver and back out these two screws that hold it on. This component is meant for the mounting of this light on the Ninja 400 and ZX6R. And for the ZX10R, we do not need it because the tongue acceptor is already built into the back enclosure of the light. So let's now proceed with the rest of the assembly. All right, so we grab our new taillight, get our grommets in here. It's a fairly simple procedure. I just like to seat them and then give them the spin test. Once they spin freely in there, it means they've seated properly. And now we can begin to install this in the bike itself. You can see here a programming button that gives you access to those 9 program states within the taillight. Will remain fully accessible from the trunk compartment, so you could change your program at any point if you so decide. I need to replace this wire loom where it was originally and get my wiring in, and I like to go to the left side of the subframe. Now, this is another one of those parts where we need to be really patient. Get one corner in and work the rest of the geometry up into this compartment, making sure that our wires are over the grommets. I want to clamp them under because then we'll have to undo it all. And all these polypropylene pieces here, they have enough flex so you can move them away and manipulate everything. Okay, before engaging our grommets onto the bosses, we will need to replace this rubber piece on the tab that the taillight will sit in now. And our taillight has the same sort of geometry here like the OEM taillight. So that is where we'll slide this in. Once it fits up in there, I'll make sure that the wires are still in the right place. And now slide my grommets over those bosses. All right, looking good so far. We have a giant gap here for the moment that will close up when our Fender Eliminator goes back in place. We'll have difficulty closing it up entirely unless the wiring is sitting properly up here, because it will interfere with this taillight going up. So make sure that you don't have a bunch of wires bunched up. All right, let's plug this taillight in and see how we did. Okay, so it looks like all the functions are working. We have all the different program modes going. The only thing I have to mention is that since this bike has a stock signaling system, we haven't changed the OEM signal relay to an electronic unit yet. You could see that it's flashing really, really fast. So what that'll do, if you switch to sequential mode for signals, it'll just blink really fast. It won't make sense as a sequential signal. So that modification will have to be made, and we'll show you guys what it looks like when it does have a relay at the end of this video. So let's proceed with the reinstallation of all these top parts here. All right, so for the reassembly procedure, we're going to start up here with these self-threading screws going into these bosses. Now remember, these are self-threading screws going into plastic, so you don't want to over tighten them. We do not have any additional Fender electrical equipment being routed into the bike. If you do, like a license plate light, external signals or anything like that, this is the point where you want to route all the wires in and connect them. Go beyond this, you will not have access. So think about that. For us, we can just go ahead Now we can replace the screws that came out of these locations here over the grommets. They do have these larger washers that are captive on them. And we'll need to make sure that they go in on axis with the boss, and also that we don't clamp any of the wiring with that washer. Again, self-threading screw into plastic. You don't want to over tighten it. One note I want to make here is, since we are installing this apples for apples with the OEM setup, we will not be trying to remedy that 2.5mm gap underneath the taillight. If you are extremely picky and want to remedy that, I can advise you to cut down on the foam that sits under this taillight and then grab large washers that have a large enough inner diameter to fit over these bosses, and then clamping down with the OEM screw that came out of this location. This will cause the grommets to compress just a little bit more and close that gap for you by about 1mm, leaving you with a 1.5mm gap, which guys that are extremely picky should be happy with. All right, that looks good. I'm going to check my wiring, make sure that it's not posing a challenge for this taillight to come up against the subframe. And now it looks like we're good. I'm going to replace this component in here, working backwards. So plug this plug in first. Get it aligned with all of the screw locations. We will replace our electrical components on the tabs that receive them. And this component just lives in here like this and gets covered with the top of the tail fairing. So let's get our fairing back in place. Remember the sliding locks going into all these interference windows. So you have to align everything first. Make sure that you get engagement on all of them, making sure this tab is up on top. And when all of those components, those features that lock this together are aligned properly, and you slide this forward, your screws here screw holes will align and all the gaps will look normal. So we will grab these screws that came out of here and place them in. Now these forward screws, these two, they go into rubber well nuts, so you don't want to over tighten them. You engage your well nut and leave it at that tightness. And now we can jump to the bottom, reinstall our Fender Eliminator, and then we'll be done. As we start to tighten down on this piece, you guys will see this gap close a little bit. And now the gap is pretty much at 2.5mm where the OEM gap was. We could replace the seat or seat cowl, and now this installation is complete. I hope you guys will agree with me. This is an excellent way to give the bike what it deserves here in the back. The design language and the body lines of this machine demand something special here, and I think we've executed that really well. If you like what you see, check out tstindustries.com. We have more photos of this product on this bike, and we also have some other nifty products that you guys may want to read about. So tstindustries.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.